All right. Speaking of things we're not going to talk about,
Okay.
let's talk about the things we're going to talk about. So, welcome back, everyone, to episode six. Oh,
Yeah.
I actually forgot for a second there. Welcome back to episode 6 of Product Champs, our still weekly get together with buddies to talk about all things product careers, and life. I'm DZ.
I thought you were going to say all things product and all things champ, because I mean,
that's weird. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
I'm DZ. You guys make a quick intro, and then we'll jump in.
I'm Avi.
Ahmad. We always have a race condition going on. Why don't you go first?
I'm Ahmad. Are we ditching the titles now? That's like
I think
yeah.
Samir, like
I was game with it. As you know, episode. Okay, fine. All right, cool. Yeah, Ahmad. No title.
We're all unemployed.
Okay.
Titleless.
Let's talk about the pod for a couple minutes, like we always do, and then we'll recap, and then we'll dive into this week. So I think officially between last pod and this pod, we crossed over 100 subs on YouTube.
Yeah. Thank you to all our subscribers.
Thank you to every person we worked with, in the last 5 years.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah.
And by the way, I still, I mentioned this in the last pod, and it just keeps happening. So I just want to, encourage it because I find them so delightful. I'm still having these great off-pod conversations based on things that happen in the pod. Like people will ping us. We'll have people I haven't talked to in ages, people I want to talk to. So it's having a real delightful effect for me.
Yeah, I agree. I've gotten some nice messages, and I think it's caused some really good conversations to happen. And it's also inspired some future episodes for us. So I think that the dialogue's great.
That's right. We love the messages. And what's interesting, DZ, is that even though we haven't told anyone to like, subscribe, or hit the
few
bell icon,
times, in fact, yes.
Yeah, people have liked, subscribed, and hit the bell icon. So I think, thank you to those who like, subscribed, and hit the bell icon.
Despite our objections.
Right. Those 115 people that have liked, subscribed, and hit the bell icon. We've only had one dislike. So, our hit rate, I would claim, is very, very high.
We're also on Apple Podcasts now. Big news.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ahmad. Thanks for getting some Apple Podcasts.
Yeah,
Nice.
No worries. We are also sponsored. Brought to you. This episode is brought to you by what is the name of your shirt, DZ? Is that
Lacoste? Yes.
Lacoste. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. This episode is brought to you by Lacoste. It's the PM fashion that all PMs wear.
That's right. Actually, look. Speaking of product placement, I've had more comments and conversations not about the pod, but about the mic. So
I was going to say, brought to you by Shure Microphones.
By Shure Microphones, who make us sound podcast worthy, as it turns out. Okay. Enough of our random jitter jabber. Let's very briefly. Last episode we talked about why do products fail, which I thought, by the way, is our best pod to date. Although the numbers don't suggest it yet.
I didn't repost it, DZ. I didn't repost
exactly. Samir, why are you?
I was sick. I didn't repost it, and I messed up. Okay, so I'll repost it.
For folks who haven't listened to last pod we went into personal stories and anecdotes, and we really got deep into. Like if you listen to the last pod, you get this really comprehensive point of view on the many, many different ways why products have failed in the past. So it's terrific. You should go listen to it. This pod, we thought we'd sort of continue that thread, but in a different way, which is to say, even if you're doing all the right things as a PM, right? We talked about in previous episodes, as a PM, your key obligation and job is to find great problems for your team to go after. Even if you're doing all these things and you write the perfect PRD and you blah blah blah, do all these things, it's still really hard to get things done. So and as a result of not being able to get those things done, your product can maybe not fail, but maybe it can just never come to fruition. So we thought we'd cover in this pod and spend 45, 50 minutes talking about it is how do you get things done as a product manager? And we've heard lots of feedback from our 114 subscribers of flavors of this question, right? The flavors are often things like, How do I work with a different engineering team? How do I work with execs? But they are all kind of flavors of the same question, which is now that you know what a PM is supposed to do, and now that you know what successful products are and what failed products are, how do you actually get it done? How do you make this happen with a team, with a company, with people around you?
Yeah, I'm very excited about this topic, DZ.
Why don't you kick us off, Samir? Like what like share with us kind of your like overarching mental models as you think about translating from what the PM's job is theoretically to like how to actually make it happen.
Well, I'm glad you asked. You know, I think I think the thing that keeps on coming to my mind is one of the most useful, high impact things you can do as a PM is communication at scale. And I think about like, yes, it's true. The way this happens for different people at different levels changes. Sometimes when you're, early on in your career, maybe all it means is sending out a weekly status report of what's going on. As you move up, it becomes more about communicating the vision and the strategy of your entire organization or company. But communication remains key, right, throughout that entire step. And so when I think about how do PMs get things done, one of the most impactful ways you can get things done is to make sure that everyone is working towards the exact same vision, that they know it, and that they're on strategy and know it. And I think that's, I would say the overarching bit to being a successful PM getting things done. I'll give you some examples. It's interesting. There's a lot of people on your team. There's engineers, UXers, data scientists, program managers, et cetera, and you will work with all of them in your PM career every day, sort of getting things done. Can they all repeat the vision, right? Do they know it if you stop them in the hall? Could they tell you the strategy? I'm sure they're doing their bit extremely well and are extremely competent, but can they, talk about that? So I think that's my bit to this conversation. My contribution here is to say the most impactful way to get things done is to make sure that you are providing the clarity of vision and strategy in a way that you could stop anyone in your team in the hallway, assuming return to office post-COVID, blah, 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 and have them tell you in simple words what your strategy is. Actually, DZ, one of the things you and I talked about often is, if one of the ways PMs get things done is they bring together the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And often we found that people write the strategy, by the time they've written it, it's 10 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
And that means it's basically not even there, right? So we always talked about how a good strategy is 1 to 2 pages.
No more.
Right. And no more. And if you
No
can't, so I think one of the most high leverage things you can do is crisply write down the plan, the strategy in a 1 to 2 page document and make sure that everyone else understands it on your team.
Yeah.
Because that's going to help everyone execute, is going to help you execute and impact through scale. So I'll start us off there.
I think that's a great one to start. I'll add a few thoughts and let's hear a few more thoughts. I'll add one thought in to build on this and one sort of area where this doesn't work, and then let's dig into it some more. So I think, speaking of communication and strategy docs, we should do a whole pod on what is a strategy doc, because I've read many docs now that are titled strategy doc that are not strategy docs, and the most common problem that I see in strategy docs is they just enumerate all the problems. Right? It's just a comprehensive list, including things that are non-problems, by the way. Like once you dig into it, you realize actually you don't need to worry about this. And so getting to a great strategy doc is really non-trivial. I think people underestimate how much time it takes, how much thoughtfulness it takes. I think Samir, I think the one area where like I wonder how you think about this, and I'm facing this myself, is like if you the PM have perfect clarity of the product and where it should go over 2, 3, 5 years, then yes, put it on a piece of paper, repeat it, recite it, make it simpler, put on a t-shirt, do it on all hands, right? That's what you're saying here. But that's often not the case, right? So I'll tell you candidly for myself right now, we're going through product discovery, and there are aspects of it that we have real conviction on, and I keep hammering those aspects home. There are aspects of it where I think we know the problems very well. We don't have a solution, but we know what the problems are. And there are aspects of it where I don't even think we've articulated what the problems are very well. I know there's something there. I know there's a gap that needs to be filled. So how do you think about situations like that, where like partly what you're communicating is like, we know some things and not others, but that's not a great headline, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, this is a reality that everyone faces. I mean, there's things, you know, with more certainty, and then there's things that you eventually have to solve that you have no idea about. In fact, in one of our previous episodes, we talked about how roadmaps basically should be questions, if you think about it, right? Like you talk about like, okay, in the first chunk of our first wave or first phase, we're solving this problem. Then, you know, our users then have these questions that we need to answer or solve for them, and that's what the roadmap becomes. So in some ways, I go back to that and say, you know, where there's certainty, you talk about the certainty, and in the future where there's uncertainty, you talk about the mission, because that's durable, right? That's why you exist. So there's durability to the mission. The questions that need to be solved in the future, and I always in my mind sort of like visualize it as waves. And imagine just you had this like nexus of like, we're doing these things now for this reason, here's a strategy. And then we put ourselves against solving the next wave of questions where we have lessons. So even visually communicating as like a core that you understand, and then future sort of states that are less certain, does two things. First, it gets people excited, because remember, one of the ways you want to get things done is elicit input from everyone about what's going on. And if people realize there's questions in the future that they know the answers to, or they think they have ideas for, they'll tell you those if you articulate what the problem is. And then B, it tells people what is locked and certain versus nebulous. Because I think one of the things people run into as PMs is, even if there's one open question about your area, you'll find that cohort of people on your team that say, we know the strategy. There's all these open questions. Well, that's not the reality, right? You have all these things you know, and then you have things that you need to figure out. So communicating it that way is important.
Yeah. Avi, let's hear some thoughts.
So I agree with a lot of what Samir had to say. And I think about this slightly differently, but mostly the same. I think that more than anything, what I find myself doing on a day-to-day basis. So first of all, I'll provide a framework for I think how we should think about this problem, which is I would say there's how to work within your team and then how to work outside of your team. So I think we're starting off with how to work in your team, right? So I'd say in your team, a lot of what I find myself doing on a day-to-day basis is giving people context and making sure that people have context for the problems they're thinking about. And I find that if you arm people with the right context, no matter what their role is, they have the ability to add value into any conversation you bring them into. If they don't have the right context, they're not going to feel comfortable jumping in, providing the right dissent, or really adding to the conversation anyway. The other thing is like making sure my team is talking to one another. That like I think too often people view the PM as like kind of the center of the hub, and everything has to go through the PM. And oftentimes I find the best thing I can do is actually take myself out of the equation or be a part of the equation and make sure like not only people have the context, but like people feel comfortable going to one another, that like the engineer can go directly to the UXer and have a conversation and then kind of report back. And that this conversation is free flowing. And then finally, Samir, you hit on this. I think I want to make sure the team is invested. So I feel like if they have context and they're talking to each other and I can get them excited about the problem, then this is a recipe for magic to happen. So even if we're in, like my team is in a similar place to yours, DZ, where we're searching for the right solution to a problem that we've identified, it's unclear and we're still developing our crystallized strategy, but the team has context, they're talking to each other and they're invested, and it's leading to really, really good things.
Yeah. Plus 1,000 to all of that.
So I think I agree with a lot of things that Avi just said, and just a touch up on communication. And then I have my own flavor of, I guess, structuring the answer of how do PMs get things done, that I'll answer in a second. But I do think communication is probably like the single skill that is most correlated with a PM success. And I know this because I've met some really good intuitive PM thinkers who like deeply understand like what's wrong, but are terrible communicators. And as a result, don't execute it, can't actually execute on those ideas. And then I meet people with terrible ideas, and they do great because they're just so good at communicating and making sure that things get done. And so I do think communication is important. There have been a lot of times where I feel like I meet one trick ponies, where every time you talk to them, they're saying the exact same thing over and over and over again. And I, at first, when I first ran into these types of PMs, I was like, do these guys do they not know anything else in the world besides these like 5 sentences that they rehearse everywhere? And it was much later I realized that they were just rehearsing the first 5 sentences that are the most important things to do and continuously drilling it, because I think I have this where like you're context switching all the time, and you assume that because you're context switching that the information that you just shared with another group has already been shared with this group. But in reality, you got to keep hitting the same information as you cross the bridge.
That hits home. So that, like, I mean, you guys know me well at this point, and I think the thing I do well is that when I communicate, it's very concise. Like the strategy papers are like poems, in some ways, right? They're stripped down to like 4 sentences. And I hate repetition. I hate repeating myself. And Ahmad, I know that idea is just wrong. I just have to like get over that fear of repetition and just say the same words over and over and over.
Even rock stars play their hits all the time.
Totally, right? Totally.
So people like to hear the good stuff, man.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. But I'll keep going.
Sorry. It touches on this idea of saying the same thing, and it builds like what I'm about to say sort of like builds on it a little bit, which is one of the things PMs often find themselves in is while they're getting things done, they're stretched thin. They can't be in all the places at the same time. Like you can't be in all the meetings. You can't be in all the decisions. I think one of the ways to get things done is to make it easy for others to predict what you would say or do. And the best way I found that is to have a few guiding principles that you consistently apply when you are there, and talk about what those guiding principles are for the product, for the operationalization as well. Like, here are guiding principles for the product. Here's guiding principles for how we work, and then use that to make decisions. And, I remember I used to have a manager who basically at every meeting would if at some point say, what are the metrics? And would also ask, what are the options, right? Like it became to a point where I knew to predict that from them. And I also knew that when I went to them, I would have to have that work done. And so they got all this work done. Basically, they got stuff done by making me just know what they were going to ask for and give it to them. I think guiding principles.
You can take that even further, by the way.
Yeah.
Just like something I do now. I mean, it's remarkable how much consistency there is in some of these things. But one of the things I do now, for that exact reason, right? I can't be in this meeting. I can't go to all these conversations. And there's teams of people now, designers and product marketers and so forth, doing this work and doing very hard work. And one of the things I've started to do more consistently is I would just tell the team up front, what is the success criteria at the end? Like at the very end of this, we're going to talk about this, right? We're going to get back together in a week or 2 weeks or something, and we're going to discuss what we discovered or what you created or what you want to build or whatever. And I can just tell you right now what the scorecard is. I'm gonna think about these 3 dimensions, and if we check all the check boxes, automatic yes, right? If it's too, basically I can just tell you what the scorecard is. So
that's a really good one.
You don't have to wonder about it. Right? I know actually it's good for me too, because it helps me like think through like how the scorecard often is an articulation of priorities, right? Or of things that are more or less important. I'll just tell you the scorecard. So at the end of this, bring the deck, bring the ideas. We're going to use a scorecard, no surprises, right? If you score well, it's a yes. automatic. I'm automating myself basically.
Yeah, fantastic. That's actually great. It's slightly different than guiding principle. So it's awesome. Here's how I would do it. It's sort of the guiding principle. Here's how you make decisions, and here's how you're going to get evaluated, or this idea gets evaluated. And you've basically replicated, 60-70% of what you would do in a meeting.
I think the principles do matter because these scorecards will evolve. Also, I think
That's right.
you want to give the teams latitude. I'm not trying to prescribe an answer, right? I'm not trying to say like
exactly
X, right? I'm trying to say at the end of it, we're going to judge it on these dimensions.
Yeah.
But I do feel like sometimes if it's like, hey, we're going to talk about metrics and we're going to talk about value propositions and we're going to talk about simplicity, whatever it is, imagine these principles, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, like does 2 times of simplicity equals 1 time of metrics? Like, it still leaves this question of like, when we have to make trade-offs against these dimensions, how would you make it Samir, right? And you basically Samir can say, well, the way I would think about it is you need to at least reach this. So this one is about the floor. You got to get above the floor. And this one is about knocking out the park. And this one is about not getting fired, right?
Yeah.
Hey, one more thing I just want to, this is a great one to lead off on, because I think we all agree, even though I didn't think of it when you were saying it, that this is probably the most important skill. I think there's another characteristic of great communication. You guys both touched on it, but you never said the words, which was at the end of it, it's not, I think it's actually less about can this person consciously convey exactly what we're doing or not doing, right? I mean, that's a dream. That's an ambition. That's a dream. I think another sort of stepping stone towards that dream in terms of great communication is, does this person feel the feels? Does this person care, right? You have designers and engineers, front end, back end, people working API, business development, all those sorts of people, right? And, one aspect of them wanting to do this work is like, they believe it's important. They believe that what they're doing is important. They believe that the problem is important. So like, even if they can't exactly say, hey, our objective function is Y, we're solving for Z, the strategy is X, blah, 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 right? If you ask them, hey, is this important or not? And they should be able to say, yes, I really believe in this, right? So like that emotional side of like, have I emotionally bought into this? I think is something related.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's actually something you can't fake, right? Like, I think that's part of picking the right problem to work on, is like picking also a problem that you actually care about and are passionate about. Because I think your team senses that. And it may just be that you're so intrigued by the problem that this is a really interesting, tough problem to solve. But ideally, you really care and know the problem space well. And I think, that's like really hard to, if you don't, to get right.
Yeah.
I think there's one thing that came to mind, TZ, on based on what you and Avi said. But Ahmad, you said, it seemed like you wanted to say something as well.
No, I mean, you go ahead. I'll go after.
Okay. Someone I really admire as an author, speaker, Guy Kawasaki, right? He was like the original marketer for the Mac or something. He's got a bunch of things going on. I remember this one thing I read like 10 years ago, and I still remember it. And it's kind of about the feels, right? Like it's kind of like about, does it give people the feels? One of the things he said is, there's 3 ways to make sure that you are like, you're building meaning into something, or like you're solving the right problem. The first one is like, it increases the quality of life of someone. Like if you're increasing the quality of life of someone, okay, it's good. It's durable. People get excited about it. The second thing is, if you're righting a wrong, if you find a wrong out there and what you're doing is trying to right that wrong, people feel the feels. Like you can get people excited about that. Yeah. And the third is, preventing the end of something good. Like if something's good and it's about to end and you're standing in the way of destruction, you can get people excited about that. So I think there have been times in the past, I remember when we were working on YouTube planning, one of the things that I used to try to do, it's funny because it's all relative, and like in advertising, nothing is really wrong. It's just about making money. But the point is, I remember, bringing to the team this idea that it was wrong that YouTube was making less money than TV. Like this was like, for for the amount of time people spent watching YouTube, for the
value
we could,
created. Yeah.
it was wrong that we were doing it. I got people riled up on this idea that it was wrong that there was this injustice in the world that we were writing, and people really bought that. I mean, I think it's, they felt they were working on it, so obviously they were predisposed to thinking about, why YouTube should make more money. But I think phrasing your communication in terms of how are you making life better for the user, how are you righting a wrong, and how you are preventing the end of something good is a great way to get your team to feel the feels, right?
Or
And
said
make it
differently,
more
if
about
you're
just the strategy.
if your product isn't doing one of those three things, like what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it
100%.
has to start with you, though, right? Like, I think that, for instance, like I know with me, doing something for the first time gets me really excited about something, right? So like if this is a first of its kind product, I can get behind it. If we're solving a problem that hasn't been solved before, that makes me really interested. And that's what I'll pass on to my team, right? So I think it starts with like you as the PM feeling the feels and understanding what gets you excited,
Totally.
and then being able to
not
pass
bought
that
in,
on.
you cannot sell it.
Yeah.
You can't sell the vision. Ahmad, jump in here.
Yeah, I really like what Samir said, because I think some of the cases where I feel like I've gotten the most conviction around a feature or ideas, a product space that we should enter in my career, has always been like catchy, short sentences that convey strategy that people can get behind. This happened to me in my current job, happened to me in my previous job. And it doesn't need to be 100% accurate, because I have had, jerks get in the room and be like, well, technically, 90% of 10% of the time this happens. If it works the majority of the time and it sticks, it can rally people, because as two people who are trying to figure out how to make a product decision or an engineering decision get stuck late in an evening on like what to do, it's the thing that they can rally behind, kind of like in the echo chambers of their head in terms of how to make decisions. So anyway, I like the YouTube example. I think if you could figure this out for your own product area and have it stick, I will take a opposing view from Avi that while I think it can originate from you, I think what it ends up being is based on what the stickiness of the, like I tried to go by AI, that didn't stick, right? So, you gotta figure out how to tweak it so that it ends up sticking with the group that you're working with.
Copy matters. The little snippets. It's those little ear hooks.
Yeah.
Hey, let's take this in a radically different direction, because I want us to cover more ground here. Because I think we nailed it on communication. We at least covered a lot of thoughts there. Let me take this in a very different direction for a few minutes, and let's talk about negotiation and incentives. Right. So communication, I think, is the raw answer, which is like, hey, if I just tell the right story to the right people enough times, it's that quote of like, don't ask people to build a ship, just help them desire the open ocean or something. I can't remember this quote, but you guys, our listeners know this quote, right? That's the inspirational version. I think there's also another reality that we should be honest about, which is understanding the incentives of people and teams and negotiating those incentives. And I'll give you a few examples here to just tee us up, and then let's dive into this, which is actually this happened today. We had a group of PMs at LinkedIn, coworkers of mine at my level, and we're talking about negotiating with our engineering teams, especially our engineering leaders. And specifically what we meant was we will often think about, like not like theoretically think about, but actually have a conversation about which engineer needs to get promoted and what type of product or problem or thing do they need to work on to get that promotion. And then we'll have a real conversation about that jigsaw puzzle, right? Here's the product roadmap we're trying to ship. Here are the engineers and what they need. And we'll try to fit it together such that you end up with the right product roadmap. And also you are solving for all these different levels of engineers on the team, so that when they go out for promotion, they have the right, basket of things in their promo packet. And I think that happens a lot, by the way. I don't think, do I want to be doing this? Maybe not. Do I feel like it's a necessary part of the job to really think about what does the engineering team need? What does the market, not just like what do they need to do, but what does that person need to be successful, right? I feel like I think about this a lot, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with this, DZ. I think I encountered this a lot. And I think you taught me this lesson a while ago, that like really look out for people's incentives. I think my observation is that it's far easier for people to say no than to say yes.
Mhm.
And one way to get around that is to really understand what their motivations are. So I think with engineers, thinking about what they want in terms of their career is really helpful. But I think this applies to almost every other stakeholder, that like if you can really understand what their incentive is and how they're motivated, it becomes easier to get them to say yes than to give that kind of what your gut instinct is, which is the easy no.
So one thing I've seen, in my current company is the incentives have different flavors beyond like person's wants or person needs to launch something. What I've seen is, there's a culture at my company of celebrating very small wins. And the typical thing you guys remember at Google are like, congratulations, all this stuff, but like very tiny pieces. And what I've seen that do is actually incentivize the team to prioritize smaller wins than bigger bets, because it's to be fair, like my company takes very big bets, but I just wanted to say that, like, even things like celebrating, like, made this copy change and now this is the uplift, which I've seen, and I've seen at Google, by the way, too. Those types of things, I think rewarding that type of behavior creates a culture at the company that looks for easy W's as opposed to big bets, depending on what you need as a PM, right? Like if you're in a space where you're trying to take a much bigger swing, and there's a culture on that team of like, well, what copy changes can we make to improve, conversion rate? There's an interesting culture play that you have to figure out how to navigate in order to make sure that like the way the team is thinking about success is aligned with what you actually need to get done.
That's interesting. I mean, I think both of you are touching on something very profound and real, which is, as product managers, it is often the case that your work is not transactional with someone, right? Your work is based on relationships, and those relationships have, like in any relationship, you have to care about the person, not just the outcome. There's not just did we build this and launch, it's did you get what you wanted out of this as well. To DZ's point about the careers, and to Matt's point, like, culturally, are you being recognized and rewarded? So that's actually a really important theme here, which is one way, to put it in the context of the question we asked at the top. It's one way to get things done as a PM is to figure out what gets rewarded in that society,
exactly,
right, in that culture, and structure the work that you're doing so that people doing the actual work get recognized and rewarded for what they want.
Totally.
Figure out and hack the incentive structure in some way.
I think we quipped. I mean, I don't remember this conversation exactly, but I feel like one of us said this at some point, that like, if we really want to understand the culture of a company, don't go look at what they say about their culture. Go look at their promotion rubric, and go look at who got promoted, right? And 100%. that will tell you a lot more about the culture than the bumper stickers. So is the lesson? I just wanted to tee it up and make sure we are getting to, or just spell out the lesson a little bit here, is that there are not only, there's actually two things. One is that there are differences between all sorts of organizations and companies in terms of what these incentives really are, right? I think that's one thing that I'm hearing from you guys. Two is that I suspect that these incentives are, in some cases, the real incentives are in conflict to the official incentives, right? Meaning you had to go talk to people to figure out like what gets rewarded. It's not always obvious just from, the HR onboarding document. And three is just be mindful. Like if you're unaware of this sort of stuff, to Avi's point, you're going to run to 1,000 no's that could be easy yeses if only you turned it a little bit so that it better fits with the reward function of the marketing team, as an example, or the data science team, or whatever.
There's one thing I want to add on to it. And I think there's one final like golden ingredient here, which is you have to be trusted. And I think you have to earn that trust. That I think you can do all these other things, but if both on your team and externally, you're not known as a good trusted actor, you're not going to be able to get anything done. Because I think, to Samir's point, these are relationships and it's not transactional. And certainly these are not single transactions. Assuming you're in the role for 1, 2, 3 years, you're going to have multiple encounters with the same folks over and over again. So knowing that on this one, they may not have gotten exactly what they wanted, but on the next one, they will, right? And you will keep your word and help them next time round, or the other way around, that they will help you, I think makes these dealings a lot easier. And over time makes for a much healthier, team and just general environment.
Plus 1,000. Yeah, that's fundamental. I feel like if that one's not there, the rest of the stuff kind of doesn't matter.
Could I take a slight pivot in the way
Let's go for it.
Great,
Let's do it.
Great. So the question, how do PMs get things done? I think in the past we've talked, at least as a group, not on this podcast, about PMs that are very high agency and low agency. And something I found both in myself and in others that really make an exceptional PM in terms of how to get things done is recognizing what's, there's a, I told you guys I've been reading a lot of philosophy. I originally thought that the person who said this was a Greek philosopher, but it turns out it's been retranslated for Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's still good for PMs.
No idea where this is going anymore.
It's God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think for PMs, this is the thing that you should always keep in mind, because random org things are going to happen, random reorgs, your competitor is going to launch something that's way cooler than the thing that you guys are building, whatever it might be. Or you're arguing with an engineer about how to build a feature or whatever it might be. And being able to take a step back and recognize what is not within your control, and therefore you should not spend any breath or frustration on it, and recognize what is in your control so you could have a clear decision-making framework for what next steps you could do to sort of address the issue. I think that's, in my opinion, the key thing, that no matter, you put any solid PM in any organization, if they know this, they can get things done.
But by the way, just to add a little bit more color to that, I mean, there's also just from a day-to-day perspective, I can tell you personally, one of the things that's probably the most frustrating. By the way, I think all four of us are the same way here. One of the things that's most frustrating is when you know what the right thing to do is, and you have no way to manifest it, right? And this happens a lot with organizational issues where you're just not, you don't have the leverage, right? You don't have the relationships, you don't have the time, but you actually know. And then 3 years later it happens. And you're like, that frustration is that's the worst pain I think a PM can feel, is to be in that spot.
I felt like we talked about decision making here a little bit, because I think one of the things we do is have to make a lot of decisions to get things done. Sometimes these decisions are very complicated. You don't have anywhere near the amount of data you need. The stakes are high. You get one shot. Sometimes a lot of things are reversible, two-way doors, whatever. But there's things that, are, even if they're two-way doors, they're expensive two-way doors. And there's this point of I've obviously said trust. You got to be trusted. So how are you making a decision that's grounded in something that people can trust or believe, and they trust not just you but the process? Going back to resource, I really enjoyed is this I think it's a book. It's called Decision Quality, or something. I'll find we'll link it. We'll put it in
the notes.
Yeah, but basically, there's a book. It's called Decision Quality, and it basically teaches you how to articulate a decision frame. Like, here are the things that context, I think, right? Here are the things that everyone should know about. Here are the assumptions I'm making. Here's what I want to achieve. And therefore how, I've come to this decision. I think there's also a couple of like YouTube videos that walk you through the book, or like lectures about the book. I found it fascinating. And, I sometimes use this tool to get things done by using it to make decisions that are very high stakes, where I don't have all the information, but I need to come up with a case for what's going on. So, going back to the original question, how do you get things done? You make decisions. Decision quality is a great book and a great framework to use to make better decisions.
Also to communicate, I think, right? Like,
yeah, 100%.
That's probably what's bitten me not the most, but I can definitely remember examples where the decision was correct, but I didn't almost like document the thought process, and that came back to haunt me like 12 different ways. Sorry, Ahmad, you were about to say something.
Yeah, one thing I was going to say is like, I really like that approach, Samir, and something I feel like that sneaks in there and hurts your trust as a PM is when someone says, well, why don't we just go get the data that will help us make this decision? And a lot of times what I've realized is when you get confronted with that, like, let's go get the data, you don't want to be the guy in the room who's like, no, let's not go get the data. And a lot of times getting that data is actually very expensive, very time consuming. And like, is the ROI, I don't think enough people question, is the ROI to get the data worth this decision? Thank you, Samir. And this half of the episode is brought to you by Decision Quality.
Who's the author, Samir?
There's 3 authors, but one of them is Carl Spetzler.
Okay, we'll mention that.
Yeah, we'll link it. We'll link it.
Yeah. I think the gist of what I'm trying to say is I think people should be looking at going and fetching the data is actually, like engineering tasks, actually sometimes ends up being more expensive than what people think. And it's better off asked, like, is knowing this data going to change actually our opinion that much? And figuring, is the ROI of going to get that data worth it?
But I think there's a cost to showing up with no data, right? So like I think Samir brought up that idea of trust, right? That I was talking about as well. I think it's equally dangerous as a PM to come and say, I think this is true because I think this is true. Right? Like I think you really have to be able to at least bring something to the table. If it's not data, then like, I don't know, pose the question, then what is it, right? What do you bring?
Yeah, I mean, for context, by the way,
for real, I don't think we should that's probably one of those things that PMs often get wrong. Like that's one of those areas where like the reality of PM and what is written in the books are so different.
Yeah.
Is like, the reality is you're more like Samir's description. You're in a very vague context. You're grappling at this, you're grasping at this, and you're sort of cluing into things and trying to piece it together. So you neither know the problem nor the solution. You had to piece together an answer anyways. And the book answer is like, well, first I'm going to go research this by talking to these customers, and I'll ask them these questions, and I'll go look at these logs and find this stuff. And for a variety of reasons, that is, that sometimes works, but often doesn't.
Yeah, a lot of times, especially if it's a new space, right? And a lot of times, the places where people are most afraid to make decisions is when it's like most unknown.
Totally.
Right? Like you're like uncharted territory. And in all of those times, getting data is actually very hard.
Actually, to build on that idea, Ahmad, like one thing I've found helpful is to get everyone to admit they don't know either. Right? So like, so there are certain spaces, like let's take LinkedIn as an example with jobs, right? With jobs and hiring, we should not be basing off intuition at this point. There's a very, very deep database, maybe like Google and search, right? Like this is not an area for like intuitive. I mean, intuition still matters, but like there is a real data set you can go look at. But I think one thing there's actually what I'm trying to get at. There's lots of these small tactics about getting stuff done beyond the kind of broad umbrella of communication and prioritization and negotiation and so forth. One tactic I've used with more senior leaders, when I'm trying to discuss things with them, is just to get everyone to grapple with the fact that they don't know either. Like nobody knows. Like to obvious point, like this is a question and a space and a problem for which there is no analog. you can't go look at Facebook or Twitter. Like there's no like great data set or example that we can point at. And therefore, we're going to have to be basing it off of more first principles, thinking through that user in that context and that pain, that need, and looking for adjacent ones and doing it that way. So just getting people to admit they don't know can be a helpful starting point for these conversations.
I agree. So one question I want to pose is, I think I've encountered this on a couple of teams now where in the absence of all that data in kind of what Samir is describing, when things are very unclear, both in terms of the problem and the solution, I find myself sometimes as a PM, my role is to just try to make a decision, just try to push a decision forward. It's sometimes the wrong decision. And sometimes you have no idea how wrong the decision is, but sometimes action feels better than nothing, right? Trying something feels better than just debating what might or might not be wrong. What do you guys think about this?
1000%.
Yeah, for me, when I first joined Google and I first met Samir and DZ, I think I thought of myself as a perfectionist, or I wanted everything I launched to be perfect and have all the bells and whistles that I ever imagined this product to look like. And it has the Ahmad stamp of approval. And it took a whole year of you guys saying, nope, just launch. Nope, just launch. Nope, just launch. Just push the thing forward, get it to the finish line. Whereas like it finally got out of that habit. So I think this makes a lot of sense. Like you just got to push the rock up, you got to push the rock forward, even if it's the wrong decision, even if it doesn't, even if you know that it's the wrong decision. Sometimes it's just better to move forward than to stand still.
There is this story that I when I was interviewing for Google, I was reading about the history of Google, and I forget which executive did this, but there's some executive that had joined Google and was having a really rough time. Just there were a ton of decisions to make. And somebody said, go get your private pilot's license. And it was like super weird advice, right? It was like, he's in the middle of everything. There's a ton going on. And that's a lot of work. Like it's a huge commitment. And he ended up finding it extremely valuable because what he realized is that once the plane's wheels take off the ground, you can do nothing but make decisions until the plane touches down again, right? So there's no moment where you can actually stop making decisions and stop taking action. Even if it's the wrong action, it's better than doing nothing, right? If you freeze, you die. If you keep making decisions, you're better off. And I think about that a lot as I'm building products, right? That like you've got to keep yourself and the team moving forward. Ideally, it's in the right direction, but still keep moving forward, even if you're not sure.
Oh, that's a good story, Avi.
That's a good one. Yeah. I feel like this is a golden gem of an anecdote. I've never heard this before.
Yeah, I've never heard this one as well. It's great.
Okay, guys. So I feel like we covered a ton. I feel like we basically started 4 more pods of content. Like these tactics we can get into. We should look at strategy papers at some point for real.
Yeah.
I'm just upset at how many bad ones there are that I have to read, mostly. But I think we're running long for this week. So let's wrap up. Let's do our usual carve-outs, and then we'll wrap it up.
I will carve out. What's interesting is this news. So Apple rarely makes mistakes with their communication.
Yeah.
But oh boy. Right? I mean, oh boy.
We should do a pod on this. This is a good one.
Yeah. This is so for those who don't know,
I don't know what you guys are talking about. So yeah, please
come
school me.
on.
I swear my head's
the kids don't know. Samir, tell us.
The kids don't know. Yeah. Well, we can't. This is just a carve out, Ahmad. So I can't go into this too much, or DZ will cut me off. But Apple recently announced that they were doing a bunch of things to they were doing something to scan for CSAM, child images. Yeah, child porn images, right? This is a problem that needs to get solved. Apple says they're doing it in a way that respects privacy as best as they can. They're doing it in a way that is as privacy safe as possible. And the messaging for it basically came across as Apple is scanning images on your phone. And that led to the whole, well, hasn't Apple spent like billions and billions of dollars building up this, image of you own your device, privacy first, blah, blah, blah. And with one misunderstanding of something, a lot of that equity was rolled back and now they have to re-explain themselves. And so that's just on my mind in that, it reminds me of something my mom said once, which is, you can be like, it's like you can spend your life building up your reputation and then it takes one thing to sort of destroy it. Now, it's not destroyed in Apple's case, but it certainly felt that they spent so much time building up this equity and then so much of it got rolled back. And it wasn't even for something legitimate. So messaging, communication, right? It's so key. It's all over the news. You should,
This happened to Robinhood too, by the way.
Yeah.
Years of building a democratized financial,
absolutely. And then they got
wrecked.
Then they got wrecked and
by the way,
all
this
like,
is kind of the
selling out to
exact
the big guys.
opposite of like half of our pod. Our pod is like keep moving forward at all costs, move forward. I mean, there are some real consequences.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's a slip up that will cost you a decade.
You definitely can make bad decisions.
I mean, I think this is, so we didn't have time to explore this whole point, but that was part of it. There are some decisions where no decision, everyone will say you have to make a decision and 99% you're right. But there are some cases where it's better to say, you know what? I don't think we have everything we need. We're not sure enough. Let's not do it now. In a way, that's deciding too. But I think it's sometimes,
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I think in the moment, it's really unclear which of those is right.
That's right.
Okay, great carve out. Very topical. Avi?
All right. I've been doing some self-reflection. I've realized that I thrive off of having a lot of plates spinning, but and this podcast is one example of those, right?
As someone who knows you very well, this is very true.
This is true. So I love it. It makes me excited, but also at some point in my life, I need to realize balance. And there are moments like right now is one of them when I look up and I go, wow, there are so many plates spinning. Are there too many? And I think at some point, either I need to embrace the plates spinning all the time or figure out how to make less plates spin. And I'm not sure which is the right thing, but the one thing I've realized is I enjoy it. I actually get a lot of joy.
Yeah. Maybe it's both, don't do it all the time. Cycle on, cycle off,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if you enjoy it, Avi, another analogy that could work is you're juggling a bunch of balls, and if you enjoy juggling all these balls, your key is really just how do you keep the smallest amount from dropping on the floor, and as long as you're always happy, then I think you're golden.
Yeah,
I enjoy lying on the beach, not doing any
juggling.
juggling.
Many times.
Yeah,
we believe you at
that
this
person.
point.
As Samir goes back out into the workforce soon. If you're listening to this and here comes a future product leader into your organization.
Actually, what I was thinking was, Ahmad, one of the things I've always wanted to do is go back to school. Which school? Can you tell me a good school? Do we have anyone here who's been to a good school?
That's the worst segue.
The prestigious.
Typically,
school.
There are a couple in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Massachusetts has a good one.
Which one is Ahmad talking about in Massachusetts?
There's a fantastic one called the
got so
Massachusetts
close.
Institute of Technology.
Oh
MIT.
wait, that's where DZ went.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. DZ, was that going to be your takeaway that you missed?
I was genuinely surprised by that one. I did not see that one coming. Ahmad, tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, a couple of things. But I'll narrow it down to one. Since Samir said Apple, I think I watched a video recently by Gary Tang. Do you guys know who this guy is? Yeah. He did a really good one recently on Google and how they are just sitting on buckets of cash. And I think he has a video from Peter Thiel in there that's like, these guys are sitting on $135 billion, 0% earnings. So it's literally being burnt due to inflation and they don't know how to spend it. And it made me question Apple, because Apple I know has way more cash. And Apple, I guess, something that I'd love to discuss with you guys, whether it be on the pod or not, is does Apple actually give a shit about privacy, or is it all a tactic? Because one of the things that's really pissed me off recently is every article website I go to has pissed me off with this accept cookies thing. And I really enjoyed my life previous to this. And now Apple's like on their fucking iOS about privacy. And now I'm clicking accept cookies every goddamn page I go to.
For the rest of your
So-
life. In fact, I'm
Yeah,
not.
no, like who wins here?
It's the
just
TSA.
Apple.
We've built the TSA for websites.
You know what other video Gary Tan has that I watched or I queued to watch? Why Ethereum is going to $10,000.
Oh,
You should
okay.
yeah. So when you told me Gary Tan, I was like, okay. I thought
So
that
you
was
never
one
even
you're
watched
talking
the
about.
video. Do you even know
Well,
why it's gonna go to the $10,000?
No, he hasn't watched the video yet.
no, I've queued it up.
it's queued
It was
up.
on my
He's just-
list.
He believes.
You got the
He
information
believes.
you wanted, and
That's
then
right.
you're like, you know what? I'm done.
It's all in the title. That was
Confirmation
the
bias.
least. It's
More
the
money.
least clickbait video ever. It's like it tells you the answer. It's going to 10,000.
Let us know.
Give me
Let us
more.
know in next week's pod.
Exactly.
Report back.
No, yeah, exactly.
Okay, last. I'll do my final one, and then this has been a great pod. Always a ton of fun. I think for me, I'll just bring it back to something I said at the beginning of this conversation, which was the thing I've gotten the most joy out of. One of the things I get a lot of joy out of is the great conversations that this pod has spurred. I think, to Avi's point, one of the things I get a great deal of pleasure from is like the day-to-day work, like the product vision and strategy. I love that stuff too. But also like sitting down with a single person or a small team, right? And working something out and figuring something out that you didn't know, 50 minutes ago, right? And then having that relationship and having that bond that you build over time. So I feel like for some reason this pod has helped. It's helped me have some conversations with people I didn't expect. And I'm just loving it. That's my Carve-out.
I love that.
Good feels and good times, buddy.
Good feels, good times. Okay, guys. We shall
Until next week.
see you next week.
So yeah.
Bye.